little town of Seremban in Malaysia to the big city lights of Penang. And the first thing I did, the very first thing I did, was to set out and find a church. And I found one. I found a beautiful old church in the heart of Georgetown, the capital of Penang. And it had the right mix of everything in it, you know, like the right combination of, in the congregation, of old people and young people and creative types and the fledgling professionals, you know. And the pastor, he was so warm and kindly. He took me under his wing, you know, and very soon he became my spiritual advisor. So I thought I was going to grow to fall in love with this church more and more every day. And if I was blessed enough, maybe I would find a potential husband in the congregation. You know, after all, I was only 23 then. So every Sunday when I went to church, I would scan the pews, you know, looking for any young man with an unadorned ring finger, you know. Now, he didn't have to be rich. He didn't have to be handsome. He just had to be a good Christian man, you know, someone I could share my bright future with. But God had other plans for me. One Sunday, as I was sitting in my usual seat in the last pew at the back of the church, a young woman walked in. She came in and she sat next to me. She was beautiful. I couldn't help but admire the way she tucked her long, straight hair behind her ears. She turned to me and smiled. What an enchanting smile she had. It was, my heart skipped a beat. Anyway, she said hello and we had a conversation. Couldn't help but notice that she had these dimples. Oh. And so then she had this conversation with me and it was very plain and simple. And it turns out she's new to Penang. And so we made plans to have coffee. And that simple coffee, it led to hours upon hours of just talking and laughing. And, you know, we had so much in common, you know, so much. We loved museums, we loved art, we loved theater, we loved hiking, food, wine. Oh. So one day we went for a hike and then we got caught in the rain, you know, and when we got back, I said, hey, I'll make you dinner tonight. And she said, sure, why don't you come over to my apartment? So I did. And I made her dinner that night. And I still remember that because after that, she popped open a bottle of wine, you know, and we sat and watched one of the many rented movies that she had on video. I still remember, you know, it was Notting Hill. It was Notting Hill. And, you know, the one with Julia Roberts in it. And the thing about Asha, right? The thing about Asha is that she could do these wonderful impersonations, okay? She could mimic all these actors on the screen. So I still remember that night. It was so funny. She did this impersonation of Julia Roberts. It was, you know, that scene, right? The scene where she goes, I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to love her. Oh my God, she was so adorable. She was simply adorable. So then it became like a routine for us, you know, it became a routine. Every Friday we finished work and then we went to the grocery store and I would be, you know, pushing my trolley right behind Asha and just pointing at all my favorite foods like a 5-year-old, and then she would just pick everything up and just throw it into the trolley. And then on Saturdays, we would go to the museum, we would go to an art exhibition, we'd go hiking. But every Saturday night, we would end up at Asha's place watching rented movies on video and drinking wine. It was just wonderful. And then the next morning, Sunday morning, we would wake up bright and early, put on our best outfits, red lipstick, and off we would go to church. So that became our routine. So after a few months, I found that I was leaving a lot of my stuff in Asha's closet, like my clothes, my shoes, I even brought my essentials, into her bathroom. So, those little things like a lip balm or a folded toothbrush or a 3-ounce bottle of shampoo, right? So all of that was just moving slowly into Asha's place. So, what happened next was, it was a stormy night, and so the air was very cool, and we had snuggled under these blankets in her living room, and we just finished watching a movie, and her body, her warm body, it felt so good next to mine. I kissed her. And she kissed me back. And then she whispered, "I love you." I became very confused. Oh, God, no. No. This can't be happening, because I am not a vile homosexual. I am not a lesbian. Even though it felt so heavenly, like just being with her, I knew the truth. I knew the truth. I was staring into the fires of hell. My soul, my identity, my faith in God and Christianity, my relationships with my family, I could feel it all just slipping away. But how could something that is so wrong feel so right? No, it is not possible for someone to love someone of the same sex. It is the law of God, of man, and of nature. And this is what I had been told all of my life. You see, most of my life, I was taught that the only love there was the love that God had for us. And how could God hate me for loving someone? You see, Asha, she was like the embodiment of everything that Jesus taught us. She was incomparably kind. She was compassionate. She extended her love unconditionally to everybody around her. She was warm and loving. How could it be? How could it be that I couldn't love somebody who embodied Christ? And so I just couldn't think straight. So I had to go and see my pastor. And all I wanted was someone to tell me it was okay. Everything was going to be all right. That I just needed to trust what I was feeling. But no, my pastor, he became very dark and very angry. I had never seen him like that before. He raised his voice at me and he told me that what I did was wrong and sinful. He said if I loved Asha, then it couldn't be possible that I loved God. He insisted, and he said that if he saw or even heard of us spending time together, then we wouldn't be welcome in the church anymore. And I decided to follow God's path for me. So I went to Asha's apartment and I went in and I took my suitcase and I started packing. You know, I packed everything, right? I took my clothes, my shoes, I took my toiletries, my makeup set, you know, I took my lip balm, my folded toothbrush, I took my memories. And the only thing that I left behind that day was my heart. And I left it with Asha. It was not easy. Every day, every weekend, it was so painful. I'm sure the pastor spoke to Asha as well because she stopped coming to church. And I felt so empty that even God's love, it just couldn't fill that emptiness. You know, love has such power. It makes you feel these intense connections. It makes you feel invincible, validated, desired, cared for. That's exactly what I felt like with Asha. But love, it can also make you feel alone, isolated, despairing, shameful. And that is how I felt as a Christian. Then, several months later, the funniest thing happened. The funniest thing happened. I found one of Asha's blouses in my drawer. This green blouse that she used to love wearing. And then it smelled just like her. You know, this mix of the fruity floral laundry detergent and her perfume, you know. And then I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what happened. I just grabbed a suitcase and I started packing. I threw in my clothes and I threw in my shoes and I threw in my toiletries and my makeup set and my lip balm and my folded toothbrush, my 3-ounce bottle of shampoo. And then I grabbed the phone and I called a taxi and I just blurted out Asha's address. And then the next thing you know, I'm standing there. I'm standing there in front of Asha's apartment, okay? My pulse is racing. My heart is beating, you know, I can't breathe. And then I did it. I rang the doorbell. And then I rang it again. I started to sort of, sort of pound on the door, and I was just pounding, right? I was pounding. And then her neighbor came out and said Asha had moved away and never left a forwarding address. I suppose it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Maybe that's what got Esther through all those years of loveless marriage, leaving your future in God's hands, following his will. Esther used to say to me, you never need to worry. Just trust God. He knows what's good for you. I am 50 years old now. And for the record, nothing good has come my way. Well, except for Asha, but not since Asha. I live alone. I live alone with my cat. All my friends, they have families of their own. All my family have families of their own. I don't trust anyone. I definitely don't love anyone anymore. I think often of what could have been. I only leave the house to go to work. But every Sunday, I wake up bright and early and I put on my best outfit and my red lipstick. And I go to the same church and sit in my usual seat in the last pew at the back of the church, hoping and praying that Asha will walk in again. If I had my life to live all over again, I would never have given up on love. Because if God is God, he would never have made me give up on love. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharmila. I mean, I see tears in the eyes of my colleagues here. And thanks for that very thought-provoking and engaging, experience sharing. And I think you should look at the chat. Everybody is like, showering all those praises for this monologue session. Everybody is saying it's like, spontaneous and like awesome, brilliant. And, you're putting words to the emotion so well. Thank you so much for that monologue. Thank you. So we now move to the next segment. of this plenary. And this is a conversation which our own sexual and reproductive health and rights champions, our own RHRN champions, Anuj Peter Rai from Nepal and Zairo Rodriguez from Caribbean. Firstly, I will actually introduce the speakers and we have certain questions for them to respond. Anuj Peter is an open youth gay activist in Nepal. And since 2015, he has been working with Blue Diamond Society as a program coordinator at various projects, including the Right Here, Right Now project for human rights of LGBTIQA community. Anuj is also a second runner-up for Mr. Gay Handsome Nepal 2017. Welcome, Anuj. I will also introduce Zairo and then I will ask you the questions. We have our other champion, Zairo Rodriguez, and Zairo is from the Caribbean. And Zairo is a human rights advocate and social change projects coordinator, specializing in community advocacy, political lobbying, and project coordination of sexual and reproductive health and rights and related programs on gender relations, women's empowerment, youth development, and LGBT rights. Welcome to Zairo and to Anuj. My first question to both of you is, how did it all begin for you? And what were the key challenges that you faced, the difficulties that you faced in your personal journey to advance youth SRHR, including LGBTIQ rights? We will have Anuj to speak first, followed by Zairo.
Thank you, Sai, and namaste to everyone. The question, the previous session was so emotional. I was somewhat attached with the story too, because somehow I can relate my story to as well. Because when I talk my past life, I have some of the phases of that story in my life. So the difficulties is still in my life as well as with my own community, because self-acceptance and self-realization is the two key words that still LGBTI community are facing. So that's the main problems. Not only that, even though when I see my own story, I can see that there is no any peer support and no any counseling regarding to the LGBTI peoples in my country or in my community. So that's the main point that I want to reflect when I talk or when I share my story. And when I talk about the advocating my life, my issues in front of the global community as well in the national community, when it comes about the marriage equality, somehow that strike in my life, because I'm the gay, open gay, when my past life relate with the social and personal effect that reflect with the marriage. So that's the main issues, as well as when I was childish. At that time I was quite feminine, so because of that also I have faces so many problems which really impact to current situation as well, because in Nepali context there is no any proper CHE in school curricula. So that's the point that I want to reflect in my story. Thank you.
Over to you, Zairo.
Thank you. Yes, I'm still a bit shaken up by that presentation. And I mean, as Anuj did say, it's something that everyone who's queer can relate to, because there's a period of acceptance that we ourselves struggle with. And then there's the other people accepting us, including religion and society. So I was just trying to breathe through all of that, but I can do this. So I want to talk about just the experience growing up in Caribbean culture. I mean, everyone on this call, you have an idea of what the Caribbean is: just sand, beach, sun, just this beautiful laid back culture, and everyone's just vibing with each other. And that is part of what the Caribbean is. And particularly for the country I live in, where we're both South American and Caribbean, just throw in the forest there, and you have paradise. That's what everyone would call it, paradise. However, is it really paradise when we have the second highest HIV prevalence rate in the world? where homophobia is rampant to the point where someone once wrote an article calling a Caribbean island the most homophobic place in the world? Is it paradise when gender-based, sexual and gender-based violence is through the roof? And when I say through the roof, I'm talking about an article every day of gender-based violence and the most gruesome acts of women being beaten, of gay and trans men and women being killed on the street or being forced out of their homes and being beaten and then corrective rape. And when I talk about paradise, of course, I'm not talking about us having my country, Ghana, having the second highest teenage pregnancy rate in Latin America and the Caribbean. So in the entire Western hemisphere, we come as number 2. And at one point in the country's history, sexual abuse was the number 1 form of violence against young people in the country. So it wasn't the verbal abuse or the beating, which we've actually culturalized because of our days of slavery and oppressive societies due to colonialism. It's sexual abuse. So many of young people are being raped and being harassed. And the thing is, I grew up with this. And the sad thing about it is that I grew up with it being part of our culture. Yes, we don't market it to the world because we're supposed to be seen as paradise, but this was what we live in daily. Young people are not able to have conversations on sex because the older folks are completely against it due to religion. Yet, young people are the ones who are being raped and being made to go through their pregnancies and are being infected with HIV, but yet they are not allowed a conversation on sex and sexuality. And it leaves so many things disastrous in our society with hypersexuality, toxic masculinity, and even our patriarchy, the way that we shut down women. On one hand, we hold them as the most prized possession we can have. And on the other hand, we abuse them almost daily. Just this week in my country, a man killed a 16-year-old because he could not be in a relationship with her. And another man killed himself because he couldn't be in a relationship with a 14-year-old. And to look at it, as my voice, like overcoming these, like my personal journey with this, as I grew, so did my voice. As my sexuality developed, so did my actions to protect and defend it, not only for myself, but for young people, my community. Because who is speaking for us? And then being a young person can get doors slammed in your face. I think all of us in this room would have experienced that. When you're young and you want to speak to a politician or a parliamentarian or any socio-political stakeholders, they're like, yeah, but how old are you? That's the first thing. Being young can get your door shut in your face, but being a loud young person with wit and strategy can be that force to open the doors. That's why RHRN was so pivotal for us young people, especially the Caribbean Right Here, Right Now platform, because we came together, we banged ourselves together, and we said, you know what? We are much stronger together, and we can teach each other strategies and methodologies. We can face oppositions. And then when we walk into the rooms of politicians and then we speak what we have to speak, they will listen. They will listen because we are so much stronger than what they see. All right, I guess that answers my first question.
Thank you, Zaido, and thank you, Anuj. My following question to you now is, in this journey, I mean, I take this message of being a loud young person with wit and strategy, and that can force doors open. And I think even Anuj's talk around self-acceptance and identity, I mean, that was the emphasis. We just want to hear from you. What did you find empowering in this journey as a youth advocate? So what were those opportunities that you were able to seize? Over to you, Zairo.
Each other, I mean, other young people. I'm seeing colleagues in this chat that really helped me. I'm seeing Evie, I'm seeing Saja, I'm seeing my advocates from the Caribbean. I mean, other young people empower me, they've inspired me, they've motivated me. When I'm scared, like just now, I was very scared that I was thinking back about my own experience, about my relationship, my early relationship and before I came out. So I got a bit, I went into my shell. But they were in the chat, they were like, Jerry, you can do this, and then even you, like, I haven't met you, haven't know what you do or your work. And it's by observing you, learning from your experiences and sharing those methodologies. Because every meeting that we went to, we had a strategy development meeting, and we had meetings where we just shared with each other about the day's challenges or how to overcome them. There was a lot to learn from RHRN during these past couple of years and from my own experience in the field. Now, before I became a community advocate, I was mostly a social change project coordinator. I was always in the office, writing up work plans, looking at projects, and directing other young people. But my manager at the time, she's like, I need you to be out on the field. I need you to have direct experience with people. And I was always shy about meeting people and talking about these things. But when I did, it became a mind-blowing experience. It was just so phenomenal. You're hearing stories and experiences, and then you can share yours, and you just get inspired by what you can do together. So it became from sitting in an office to sitting at a desk in a classroom, from just pacing the office floor thinking about work plans to walking through the indigenous and rural communities and the people that need the resources the most. You get to have a direct impact with them, and that just motivates you to continue doing what you're doing, because it's not for you, it's for the development, the social development, the gender development of our people. And I'm so happy that we all are part of this movement.
Thank you. Thank you, Zairo. I mean, that's quite encouraging. And I think lastly, for both Zairo and for Anuj, I have this question as to what do you think have been your accomplishments personally or professionally in this journey over the last 4 years or even before that? Maybe we start with Anuj. And I also wanted to say we also have Mr. Victor here. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sai. I think the turning point of my life was when I entered in RHRN as a focal person from BDS, because before that I was just a community member, and I don't have any idea or I don't have any plans in my life that what I have to do to my community. But RHRN has grown up me and built up me with the best version of me in this past year. Because of that, I won the title of Mr. Gay Handsome 2017 second runner-up. And after that, I got the platforms with all the RHRN platform supports. They give me the platform to speak out my voice and raise my voice throughout the nation in local level, with the policy levels, in the national levels, which encourage me and give me the chance to raise my voice to my community, to the national level, and talk to the policy levels, which might change my life. I think that's the main point that I achieved, as well as I got the chance to read the statement of UPR pre-sessions in Nepal, which includes at the session with the Nepali delegates and as well as with the ambassadors too. I think that's my best experience that I achieved till date, as well as now, as Jairo says that now I'm taking some experience and sharing that experience to the youth LGBTIQ activists and getting some knowledge from them as well to inspire other, as well as to make country to somehow accountable, somehow relate our issues in the national level and make it in a policy level as well. I think that's how I developed myself, as well as the organization has been so reached out with the youth and other women CSOs, and we got so positive response from them. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Zairo, over to you.
So, you know that saying, if you work, if you really love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. That is my personal accomplishment. That is that's what I've achieved personally. Just this love of what I do, this love of people, this love of speaking with people, this love of young people. Like I so wish that we got to meet at the global festival. This is the best we can do in this time, but it still feels, it warms my heart to see everyone, people that I've met from all over the world, and I can see you. It's a sense of purpose and the knowledge of my life's ambition. This is what I want to do. And this is what I will continue to do, to learn, to learn, to meet people, to engage. It's chiseling away at that wall. That's what I found as a personal accomplishment. There's a whole wall of you being a young person, and I won't be young forever. I know that. That is why it becomes my responsibility to educate other young advocates, to pass on, to share what I've learned, to share my experiences, so that after I've chiseled away at the wall, they can chisel some more, and then the wall completely breaks down. It's that ambition, that vision that really drives me. And it's, you know, everything that I grew up with as a challenge, the discomfort of talking about sex, the statistics, the harassment, etc. All of those things will be broken down because someone was there to start chiseling. And with the support of RHRN, we've done tremendously. Professionally, what has happened in the past couple of years that I consider accomplishments, and I don't even consider them my accomplishments. They're the accomplishments of the LGBT community working together, just learning from RHRN and getting support from RHRN and other stakeholders, is that what we've accomplished, we've got the inclusion and consideration of LGBT persons in national policies. Before that, like 5 years ago, the government would not even consider LGBT rights to be real. It wasn't an issue for them because they don't recognize LGBT persons. But in my own country, in Guyana, they've had several state policies where they've listed that the government recognizes that there is a local movement for LGBT rights. They've published that at the Regional Commission on Population Development, and they've even said that they will cooperate to address these issues. That was unheard of many years ago. Now, some people argue that policies aren't as strong as laws, but policies, in my opinion, guide laws. They understand that, you know, it's the bridge between legal change and social change, that we're going to work towards something. And when society is educated and empowered enough, we can change the laws to reflect what the society has done. And that is a bottom-up approach, because what we've recognized regionally is that we can't change the laws when the people themselves are either rejecting the laws or even rejecting the governments that would even propose to support LGBT rights. So we're working with all stakeholders, and that in itself has been a professional win for us, because in the Caribbean, the governments are very accommodating now to the young voices. Before they weren't, but because of RHRN, because we're at every meeting, because we come with our papers, we come with our facts, they're more receptive to us now. So I consider that a great accomplishment and something that we can't let die. We must continue the movement, whether it's in the Caribbean, to South Asia, Africa, Europe, we all are in this together.
Thank you, Zairo, for those very encouraging words. Actually, I mean, like, you know, it's so much of inspiration. I think you've been an inspiration to all the other young people who are already attending this panel here and this plenary. I mean, you guys are the champions with strategy as well as real lived experiences that you can actually, you know, chisel the advocacy that you're working towards at national, regional, and global levels. And all power to all of you. So now we move to the next segment, and that is the much awaited segment. And we have Mr. Victor Madrigal. Mr. Victor Madrigal is the UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In this capacity, he assesses the implementation of international human rights law, raises awareness, and engages in dialogue with relevant stakeholders, and provides advisory services, technical assistance, capacity building, and helps address violence and discrimination against persons based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We are very pleased to have you, sir, and we look forward to your remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at you to make sure that you can hear me well. Wonderful. Hello, good morning, good evening to all of you. I'm saying hello to you from my native country of Costa Rica. But it is a wonderful, wonderful feeling to be sharing a space from people present from all over the world. And in particular, I want to thank the organizers of this momentous Global Youth Festival and the program right here, right now, for this invitation. It's a true privilege to be amongst you today. As was being said, my mandate was created in 2016 when it was understood that there is a need to provide visibility to the way in which violence and discrimination manifest themselves against lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and otherwise gender diverse persons around the world. Little did I know that when I was appointed the second mandate holder, succeeding Professor Vitit Muntaphoorn of Thailand, I would be on a steep learning curve myself. One of the first elements which I was wonderfully and very proactively schooled upon was the importance of looking at things through an intersectional lens. The reality that even though sexual orientation and gender identity may be a point of entry when understanding experiences of discrimination and violence or even privilege, they do not tell in and of themselves the whole story. Sexual orientation and gender identity interact with a multiplicity of other identities that we reunite in one body. Intersectionality is the name of the process through which we acknowledge all of those dimensions, and that is the dynamic process in which a distinctly unique life experience occurs. They vary in relation to identity and include, of course, gender, sex, language, experience of disability, nationality, socioeconomic status, and others. But this dynamic process also varies in relation to time. On the one hand, we will be the first generations to face dilemmas associated with many LGBT seniors who have built free and open lives in their communities and who now will face care and retirement systems that are unprepared or insensitive to their needs. We will be the first generation to address medical issues arising from the long-term use of hormones or antiretrovirals, two statistically significant factors in the gay and trans communities. Being gay has particular creation of risk in relation to Alzheimer's, for example, and many other examples. And on the other end of the scope, I have discovered and learned a lot from youth-led and youth-serving organizations who have created a whole angle of visibility to me and through me to the global international community of the realities that are faced by LGBT persons, by the multiplicity of their identities, and among them by the fact of being young. It's through the work of youth-led and youth-serving organizations that I have understood the dimension of homelessness in relation to young people. Disproportionately, LGBT people are represented amongst the homeless. Disproportionately, LGBT youth is represented amongst the ranks of those having lower outcomes when it comes to education, when it comes to employment, and suffering with particular impact in relation to these issues, including, of course, impact in economic factors that then trigger onto dependency. This has manifested itself with particular emphasis during the times of COVID-19, where we have understood, thanks again to youth-led and youth-serving organizations, the realities of young people that have been sharing lockdown with disrespectful family members or sharing equipment with family members who have then created circumstances of forced outing or perpetration of violence and inclusion. I then commend you, dear friends, for your work, for it is for your work with the particular lens of the identities that you reunite in your bodies at this point in time that you have brought many of those aspects to visibility. And it's of course really wonderful to be with you today. The pandemic has stolen a lot from us. The lives of more than 1 million of our brothers and sisters and the health of millions of others. The livelihood of what is perhaps hundreds of millions. No life has been spared from impact. And it also has deprived us of the opportunity to be together, to feel the look and smile of each other, to be closer. But we know that our work will not wait because the needs of victims of human rights violations will not wait. And I am therefore delighted that technology will nevertheless allow us to be together sharing this space. Now, I was asked to provide you with an overview of the global struggle to end violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that in the past 3 years, humanity has come a long way to promote greater equality and protection for LGBT communities. Together, we welcome the extraordinary judgments of the Indian, Botswana, and Trinidad and Tobago courts and advisory opinion OC14 of the Inter-American Court. We have seen good gender identity legislation implemented in many of our countries, and we all have seen examples of good public policy implemented. Anush, Jairo, and Keiko were to different degrees sharing with us different nuances of these processes all throughout the world. And I was fortunate enough to get here with time to hear, for example, Jairo express the change that has been created in the formulation of public policy in Guyana in relation to this issue. Indeed, the experience that I have been able to obtain through my lifetime convinces me that we have evidence that social change is possible within a generation. Many of us, 25 years ago, were born criminals, ill, and sinners. Today, we might just remain sinners, but we're no longer ill or criminal. And this is representative of significant social change. At the same time, we all know that there has been no significant reduction in the levels of violence and discrimination faced by LGBT people. I have witnessed a common paradox in many parts of the world, that progress in protecting people's sexual rights is indeed accompanied by a deluge of reactions against the validity of LGBT identities. So we face great challenges. And because of your particular position in life, dear friends, it will be up to you to see these challenges to their end. I'd like to share with you what my working theory is in relation to them. I think the sense of urgency stems from the fact that there are certain fundamental conversations taking place that challenge the very essence of over which our work is based. Number one, there is an entrenchment of countries that refuse to dismantle penalizing laws and that even seek to reestablish efforts to criminalize same-sex relationships in different parts of the world. We all know that a staggering 69 countries still criminalize some forms of sexual orientation or gender identity. And we all know that a staggering 2 billion people live in criminalized environments today. This situation needs to change, and I have made a call for a world free of criminalization by 2030. A call in the furtherance of which I think only a wide casting net of a coalition can hope to succeed. Second, there is an alliance between ultra-conservative and ultra-nationalist political and religious leaders against the recognition and protection of LGBT rights. This alliance finds common feature in the third element, which is a multinational campaign to challenge the use of gender as a conceptual tool to analyze violence and discrimination, and which goes as far as to try and prevent the academic study of LGBT rights and gender theory. My working theory for the mandate is that the value added that I can do to these challenges is to work with progressive actors all over the world to identify legal thinking to provide answers in relation to these issues, and also to provide all of you with building blocks so that you can create your strategic approaches and your frameworks to use them as instruments to promote the analysis, the deconstruction, and eventually the eradication of violence and discrimination. In this context, I would like to share with you a couple of the most recent findings of the mandate, which I think are part of this construction. This year we have faced, and we will continue to face for some time, an unprecedented global challenge in the form of COVID-19. COVID-19 has not created inequality. It has exacerbated pre-existing inequality in all regions of the world. 2 years ago, I presented a report to the General Assembly in which I stressed that LGBT people are disproportionately represented in the ranks of the poor, the homeless, and those who do not have access to healthcare. The distressing picture painted in that report, unknowingly announcing that these very factors would make LGBT people, communities, and populations particularly vulnerable to the impact of COVID-19. This year, I have been carrying out a process of listening to communities all over the world about the impact of COVID-19. And the information received confirms that the response to the pandemic reproduces and exacerbates the patterns of discrimination, social exclusion, and violence already identified in my previous work. The existence of criminalization laws, for example, exposes LGBT people to police abuse and arbitrary arrest or detention and deters them from full access to state aid programs and services. LGBT children and youth, as I was mentioning before, while contributing to social isolation recommendations by staying at home, have been forced to undergo prolonged exposure to family members that are disrespectful. And this process has exacerbated family violence, physical and emotional abuse, and damage to mental health. In most jurisdictions, LGBT people are heavily dependent upon informal economies heavily affected by COVID-19 restriction. The reallocation of health resources has also exacerbated shortages of antiretrovirals for people living with HIV, and has had an impact on the ability of trans men and women to receive hormone therapy or gender-affirming treatment. The pandemic has also created an environment conducive to increased persecution. hate speech inciting violence against LGBT people is on the rise, including speech by prominent political or religious leaders who blame the pandemic on the existence of LGBT people. Some states have also adopted measures that intentionally target LGBT people under the guise of public health. In light of these findings, I've become convinced that the development of effective and efficient solutions to our current problems resides in an agenda of social inclusion. The work of states must be aimed at understanding the barriers that systemically exclude LGBT people from education settings, employment settings, housing, and other economic determinants, and ensures full access to health and other service areas of the state. This includes an aggressive agenda of legal recognition of gender identity of trans and gender diverse persons, because only through legal recognition we can understand that access to state services and a wide range of human rights can be ensured. It also includes an agenda of proactive measures to decriminalize particular sexual orientations and to adopt measures that are both aiming at anti-discrimination and proactive social inclusions. It is not a given formula what will work in a particular setting, and I am a particular proponent of contextual analysis guiding contextual action. But we all know that all agendas will go through the political and practical understanding that LGBT persons make a contribution to our societies every day, that their lives are valuable, that they provide with value in all aspects of society, and that it is a desirable societal objective to ensure their full inclusion into all spheres of society in full freedom and equality, and with the ability to occupy public space in full conformity of their sexual orientation and their gender identity as they so decide. In closing, I would like to reiterate the work of activists, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations who operate under duress before, during, and after the pandemic, but who have continued their mission and their hard work all throughout. Over the last 5 decades, human rights defenders and organizations have forged a complex system, a system of early warning, data gathering, evidence interpretation, advocacy, and activism that has given a lot to the construction of our social fabric. I commend your work in that context. The history of LGBT people, like many other victims of discrimination and violence, has been one of suffering, endurance, and hope. It has been a vital struggle for freedom and equality in the face of singular adversity. I therefore commend your work, and I call on states to listen to the very specific concerns that you relate to them. You can know that you will always have the support, the accompaniment, and the commitment of the mandate of the independent expert in this endeavor. I thank you again for the possibility to be amongst you today, and I look forward to a continued conversation in this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks so much. And I think we have seen your very inclusive leadership, and you have been very approachable. And for all the RHRN activists and for the advocates, you've been very approachable. And I think what struck us is also about this hopeful message of world free from criminalization by 2030. And thank you very much for these remarks. We have some questions for you coming in the chat, and we'll be how could young people provide information to you for your reports, and what topics do you still envision to delve into? So this is a question from Evie.
Thank you so much for that question. It's a wonderful question to receive because it allows me to share with you a little bit of my work plan for the future. The way that youth organizations can provide input will be the continuance to the way in which some already have engaged very actively with the mandate. What I usually do is that for every major activity that I carry out, I do a call for inputs. And that call for inputs is usually reflected and expressed in the form of a questionnaire. And the way that youth organizations interact with the mandate that is incredibly useful is that they have historically asked themselves, how are those questions relevant to the lives of young people? And then they have provided me the answers, and they have demanded that I reflect on them from that angle, and they have made me accountable from that angle. I can share with you a little bit of an anecdote, which is that when I came to the mandate and during the very first few hearings that I carried out, youth organizations would take the floor and they would actually express their position and the way that they saw things. And I always had a standard answer, which was to say, well, since I'm not young anymore, I don't know how to deal with these issues, but I'm learning. And they were very patient with me. But the third time that I said that, they said, okay, you've said that enough. Now you should actually know because we've given you enough input in relation to these issues. And I like that. I like that they made me accountable to actually answer to the approaches that were being presented to me. And hopefully the way that my reports have been drafted, in which particular sections have been devoted to highlighting the way in which violence and discrimination manifest itself with particular reference to young people, is a good answer in this connection. If it's not, I always welcome the constructive criticism. I also have issued several statements in relation to youth and the connection with other problematics such as homelessness or education or access to justice. So all of that is conducive to a body of work that really answers to inputs having been made by youth-led and youth-serving organizations. The future brings exciting topics that have been in very many ways motivated and inspired by the feedback of civil society and states to my work. Next year, I will be issuing a report on gender equality, and then a report on right to health and sustainable development goal 3. The year after that, I will be issuing a report on colonialism and the impact of colonialism on the construction of social mores relating to sexual orientation and gender identity. That year of 2022, I will be also issuing a report on religion and the interaction between the rights to religion of freedom and belief and the right to live free from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And in 2023, I will be focusing on overarching evaluations of the work of the mandate and at large, the United Nations human rights machinery in relation to the eradication of violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So that's the coming thematic agenda. And as I said, for each one of those reports, there is going to be a call for inputs. When you visit my webpage, you will see that every report has published all of the inputs that has been presented by civil society. And you will see the ones presented by youth serving and youth-led organizations. And this may inspire you to develop methodologies of your own as to how you will relate in a general or in a very particular way to these issues.
Thank you, sir. We have one more question, and that's about when you make country visits, how do you make, what is generally the criteria in making country visits?
Well, another wonderful question, and I'm very, very happy that I've received it. Could I ask you, is it at all possible that you would allow me to share my screen?
Yeah, we should enable that.
Is that possible?
Yes.
Wonderful, because I didn't foresee that I would share this, but given the question, I think it might be easier for me to share this with you. Hopefully you are seeing my screen in the form of a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this to the level of country visits. So country visits are, of course, part of the functions that I carry out. And as you can see here, my view on how a country visit is successful depends on how much diversity of views is considered, how much I'm able to produce excellence in the overview that I present in the report, and to what extent is the advice that I provide useful and practically used. These are the country visits that I've already undertaken: Argentina, Georgia, Mozambique, and Ukraine. The way that I decide how to carry out country visit depends on 7 criteria. I depend on the state accepting that I visit. I cannot carry out undercover visits to a country. I always depend on the state inviting me. I then need to ensure that my visits reflect the great diversity of cultural, geographic, and legal traditions in the world. I also judge the relevance of the mandate's contribution, the safety and security of all stakeholders, the connection of issues with the thematic research agenda that I have presented to you, the views of the relevant stakeholders, and how much of a structure exists in the country where I will trust that my recommendations will be seriously considered. In the coming period, I am going to be visiting the following countries: Tunisia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and I am considering visits to Armenia, Burkina Faso, Colombia, Ghana, India, Japan, Kenya, Nepal, Poland, and Thailand. This is not a closed list. It might be that there are other countries that I bring to the list for consideration, as long as the criteria that I expressed to you are satisfactorily met.
Thank you, sir. And in the interest of time as well, I see many other questions coming in. Okay, Sai, can you follow up how supportive the countries are? So this is just a follow-up question to the previous question. And with that, we would conclude the Q&A session.
Think about it this way. When the mandate was created, it was a hugely contentious process. Several regions of the world coalesced around the idea that the mandate was an imposition of the global north and only existed with the purpose of promoting gay marriage around the world. And it was excruciating process of creation that took 5 votes around the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. The difference for the creation between the states that voted for and those voted against was only of 4 states. That was in 2016. Q2 2019, when the mandate was renewed, no region of the world coalesced around the idea of not renewing it. No more than one vote was necessary. The reason for this is that we all together, you and I, have worked incessantly to make it understood that our agenda is to eliminate violence and discrimination. And we have provided on an objective basis the evidence to that effect. States, a very important coalition of states, coalesced around the renewal of the mandate, and they came from every region of the world. Only 12 states voted against the renewal, which allows me to say that I think the mandate has now significant critical mass of support in the furtherance of its work, but also allows me to make one point, which is that this is the outcome of the work of states, but very importantly, the outcome of the work of activists, human rights defenders, and persons with lived experience all around the world. So in short, all of you. A total of 1,324 organizations coalesced around the work to renew the mandate. They came from 174 countries, and I know, because I've seen the list of people attending this meeting, that many of you are in that list. So this mandate is the result of a wonderful coalition of energy around the world to end discrimination and violence. And I would not hesitate to say that given that that's the case, we are an unstoppable force in this struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think everyone here will definitely follow. I think we have been following the web page and we will continue to follow. And now we have the closing remarks from Siva. Sivananthi Talendran, she's the Executive Director at Arrow, and she has actually had different career choices in her life. She's been teaching, she ran magazines, she's worked with the United Nations, she wrote many publications, and in addition to these closing remarks, Siva will also shine light on the key outcomes of the Asia Regional Advocacy Strategizing meeting. And this meeting was held in 2018, where we brought together LGBTIQ activists and feminists for learning and sharing on LGBTIQ advocacy strategizing in the Asia region. So over to you, Siva, for the closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone. Arrow and the RHRN partnership would like to take this opportunity to thank all panelists for their wisdom, honesty, and optimism in this plenary session today on the stories of challenges and resistance. We especially thank Mr. Victor Madrigal, the UN independent expert on violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, to make time to attend and deliberate at this plenary session. As part of Arrow's work on young people's SRHR, including LGBTIQ communities, and the challenges faced in taking forward advocacy on LGBTIQ issues in the region, Arrow and the RHRN partnership recognize the need for a space that would bring together LGBTIQ, SOGS activists, advocates, researchers onto one platform to discuss and deliberate on the current backlash towards the community in the region and strategize the way forward. This was no small task. Our partners have always told us to courageously pursue the contentious issues within and beyond the SOGS realm. Partners also pointed to the fact that LGBTIQ communities had a long affiliation with feminist groups, and their insights and experience with social mobilization helped nurture the LGBTIQ movements in many countries. Feminist analytical tools, including around intersectionality, remain critical for LGBTIQ movement building. Partners identify the power of language and the potential language has in recognizing the diversity of cultures and lived experiences that is lacking in international labels currently available to us. Language should not be underestimated. Language is political. Language needs to be carefully utilized as existing language on LGBTIQ SOGIES in the international spaces may not visibilize certain identities, and this can potentially erase certain histories and identities associated with the LGBTIQ SOGIES communities. The potential of language is also in generating greater public awareness and consequently helping us to increase acceptance and remove stigma. Owning our language is part of the power of taking back power and holding it in our own hands. Religion and religious indoctrination, which has come up a few times already, also requires some inquiry and reflection. Religion today is no longer a private matter. We need to start the discussion on how and what values are being promoted through the public discourse and public institutions that are there. How the power of the state, and in this, the heteronormative state, is then expressed through the laws, policies, and institutions to hold up the status quo must constantly be interrogated and challenged by activists and advocates. This has resulted in the invisibility of the LGBTIQ SOGIES communities for far too long. LGBTIQ organizations started off receiving visibility as a response to HIV, and as a result, only certain identities and certain frames and certain issues have received adequate recognition. In this, we have to recognize that there is a further invisibility and resistance towards LGBTI persons in the region, and in particular, and this needs to be addressed and advanced as we strategically work towards greater inclusion and greater voice for all of us. Today's plenary discussions on stories of challenges, resistance, and resilience substantiate the lessons we have all learned in ARROW and in RHRN, and call for collective action and advocacy efforts to advance the human rights of LGBTIQ persons, and our conversations, advocacy, movement building, and solidarity actions will continue to advance SOGI rights in the region and globally. Thank you all for this exciting and energetic and enervating and enlivening session today.
Thank you, Siva. And with this, we conclude the plenary session. And thank you, sir. Thanks for making time. And thanks to all the participants. And we will see you tomorrow.